A very good evening to all of you and a very warm welcome to the National HRD Network and Upohan webinar, wherein we will be reading between the lines on a very crucial topic, discrimination at work, conscious or unconscious. I am Sheetal Bansuri, the chapter coordinator for National HRD Network Pune, and sharing the platform with me today is our HR Evangelist Darpan Singh. We are your happy hosts for today's webinar. We welcome you all today on behalf of NHRD and Pune core team as well as all the subcommittee members. Our panelists will be happy to answer your questions related to the topic, so we invite you all to please share them with us at any time during the webinar using the question panel of your GoToWebinar player. I now request our treasurer, Mr. Neeraj Mankar, to welcome our guest and take the session forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheetal. And thank you, Darpan, whom we very fondly call as the big boss, who keeps on talking behind the scenes, ordering us to do everything. Uh, a very good evening to all of you attendees, as well as the esteemed panel and our dear friends Eklavya and Advait from Upohan. NHRD and Upohan share a very special bond, as it's been evident over the last many years that we've been taking between the lines here together. In the physical space, it was great to give both of them a hug when you meet, but here on the online space as well, it's always a pleasure to be with both of them. And in in the lockdown, we've been at NHRDN very kind of working round the clock to get a lot of content on, and Advait and Eklavya to Upohan have been continuing this series here, so very thankful to them. Uh, uh, we've got a very great panel today, as all of you are aware, and talking about an extremely critical topic, especially in the current times as we go ahead in terms of diversity. So I'm not going to spend much time. A big thank you to all of you on behalf of the entire NHRDN team, our national team there based in Delhi, as well as Anand, Aman, Salil, and myself. Over to you, Advait.
Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you, Sheetal, and thank you, National HRD Network in Delhi as well as locally in Pune. My name is Advait Kurlekar. My colleague here is Eklavya Malhotra, and both of us represent a consulting company in Pune called Upohan. Last over 3 years now, we've been running this program called Between the Lines. The format of the event used to be in good old times, pre-COVID times, that every month we used to pick up a management book, which we believe is a good book to read. And normally Eklavya makes a fantastic book summary presentation, as you will see shortly. Every book has learnings, every book has insights, and therefore, depending on what that topic is, what those learnings are, we would invite people from the industry, and I would conduct a panel discussion. And when I say good and good, this thing was in the pre-COVID physical space, like Neeraj said, where we used to do some physical networking over tea and bakri and biscuits, and then we used to start the program in an auditorium. Now, of course, last couple of months we've gone on online, and this is actually so. This program we do every month, and this is the 40th such program that we are doing over the last 3.5 years. Thanks, Harjeet, for your appreciation. And we are grateful to NHRDN to partner with us for last nearly 2 years now since we started, and we hope that this partnership continues. Normally the format is that Eklavya would start the presentation, summary of the book presentation. It's a summary, it's not a critique or it's not a review, just a quick summary in terms of without reading the book, you get to read the book. And then we would introduce the panelists, and then I would conduct the panel discussion. Unfortunately, today there's been a sort of, and we've been lucky to get great panelists like you're seeing today on your screen. Unfortunately, one of our great panelists, Dr. Aquil Busrai, he has a clashing kind of situation, and therefore he has to leave early. So what we are going to do is, I have requested him, and he has already agreed that he'll first share his thoughts on the topic of discrimination at workplace. We can take a couple of questions depending on the time available. Unfortunately, after that, he'll have to sort of excuse himself out. Then I'll ask Eklavya to come in and take us through the book presentation, and then we'll get on with the panel discussions with the other three panelists. So this is just a thing that we have to do, work around we have to do for this time around. So without much ado, let me start by formally introducing Dr. Aquil Busrai. Frankly, I'm in no position, it's not my place to, even do an introduction of Dr. Aquil Busrai. He needs no introduction in the HR space, but it's a great privilege and honor to have you here, sir. He, of course, is the most decorated and revered HR guru that we have amongst ourselves. Currently, he, of course, heads the economist consulting company that he leads. He has huge experience in blue chip corporates, including Unilever, Motorola, Shell, and IBM, both in India as well as abroad. He's sharing his knowledge and his experience at business schools in the Bay Area, and he's of course one of our past presidents of NHRDN. He's on several boards and institutions, and sort of contributes there in his capacity. And it's a great honor to have you here, Dr. Akil. So thank you for sparing your time. I know you have a clashing kind of interest, but thanks for accommodating our work around. We also have Padmaja Alaganandan. Padmaja and I go back a long way back to what was called AFF, now part of Deloitte, and then PwC. She has more than close to 30 years of solid consulting experience. Most of that in PwC. Before that, she was in Mercer and then Deloitte or AFF at that point in time. She's been a career management consultant and I think recently taken over as the Chief People Officer of PwC India. She's a phenomenal speaker, thought leader, and she works on a variety of HR-related and skill development kind of committees in CII at the national level. In spite of her busy schedule, she has also found time to contribute on social causes, and she does work for social ventures in Bangalore, where she's based, which basically is an organization committed to make a difference at the local level. Thanks, Padmaja, for taking time out, and welcome to this panel. Up next is Harjeet Khanduja. Again, for people who are very active on LinkedIn and active on the conference circuit, they don't need any introduction to Harjeet. He and me, or rather, I have been fortunate to be a co-speaker at many of the events that he has spoken. And fortunately, almost all the times I have spoken before him. So I will be lucky there. Otherwise, I wouldn't get in the audience. But Harjeet currently is Vice President HR in Reliance Jio. He has again huge experience across industries, automotive, manufacturing, energy, IT and services, and in organizations including the Tata Group, the Pyramid Group, and so on and so forth. He's, like I said, a prolific speaker. He's a much awarded leader as far as HR is concerned, and he routinely gets included in the top 20, top 30, top 40 kind of list of HR people. Thanks, Harjeet, for taking your time and welcome to the panel. And last but not the least, we have Amita Karadkhedkar. Like me and Eklavya, she's also based in Pune, and she works with a large major multinational bank. She heads the site as far as but more than her daytime job in the bank, I think she's more known for her huge work in the diversity and inclusion space. She works with consults with more than 20 NECs in this area in the D&I space, and like I had mentioned in my post about her, D&I and discrimination, actually are two sides of the coin, and therefore the work that she does is most relevant to what we've been discussing here. She has been a TEDx speaker and obviously gets given her work in the D&I space. She often gets called for a variety of business conferences and HR conferences organized by NASCOM, SHRM, HR Infotech, Pune Connect, so on and so forth. So thanks again, Amita, for spending your time and welcome to the panel. So with this, I go back to Dr. Aquil. and would ask you to request you to share your views on this very important and I would say currently very topical topic of discrimination at work. I was just doing some research and I was told I read that most recently Human Rights Commission has come out with a report where they have estimated more than 250 million people who have got one way or the other affected by discrimination at work. And there could be a variety of discrimination, and we'll talk about it later. One more thing before I hand over to Akil, I was just thinking about the word discrimination or to discriminate. And of course, it's a very bad word. And I thought that, what is the opposite of discriminate? And it turns out it is indiscriminate. So I don't know which one is the badder word, if there is a word like that, which one is the worst word. And that's how bad or not good practice discrimination is. And with this, over to you, Akil.
Thank you, Advait, and thank you, Pune chapter, for inviting me over. The confusion happened because of the earlier time has changed, so I'll excuse myself after I share my thoughts. I would miss out Padmaja and Amita, etc., and Harjeet. Harjeet is, I understand, Harjeet, you are a writer and a poet also, so there's quite a portfolio you bring to the table. So coming back to the topic, I would not like to use the word discrimination because that implies that you deliberately do something. So I'd rather use a safer word, bias. I'm not playing with words alone. And I want to connect the entire subject with the real life situation. So I'll share a few examples to make it a situation where all of us practicing managers can relate with and go back to our work situation whether there is any connection. Most often we measure diversity, and I'm talking about gender diversity right now, by the number of people, number of women in the workforce. And that's actually misleading because if you look at the entire workforce as a triangle and divide it into 4 parts, you'll find in any organization, large chunk of the women workforce is on the first block of the triangle, large chunk. I'm not saying junior, senior, if you notice, but they are at the lower end of the triangle. Few would be on the next layer above that, and very few would be at the top triangle. That's because at the end of the day, there's so much of bias that gets into deploying women workforce in higher decision-making process that we lose out a large chunk of good talent and good people from taking advantage from them for the organization. So first of all, measuring numbers of diversity by percentage is actually a false sense of satisfaction and doing something right. I'd rather look at people on decision-making level, how many women do we have and how many can we facilitate to go up. I'm not saying concessions. You have to make special concessions only in one area. The biological need of a woman to have a family is a biological need and it must be respected. So a sabbatical is not end of the road for a woman. And that must be built into a re-entry. Some organizations are struggling with re-entry. Some of them have elaborate plans, but in reality, it doesn't get implemented because by the time the woman goes out for her maternity and even a sabbatical for rearing a child, when she re-enters the organization, she feels she has missed the bus already. So first of all, the way we measure itself is now not having bias makes a lot of business sense. In fact, it is a business imperative. And let me share some example. When we were setting up a pager factory in Motorola in '94, somewhere in the global scenario that time, Motorola had a policy of no unions anywhere in the world because the company believed in respect for individuals. And one of the tests was that if you respect individuals, they will never have to make a group together. They missed out that the unions can be formed by outsiders in India, but anyway, the rule applied to India. And they were not anti-union. Anyway, to comply with that, we strategized how do we set up a factory that works for the company as well as works for the population around. We went to Madras. There's an old Madras highway. Those of you from Bangalore would recognize what I'm talking about. And we studied some of the garment factories. 90% to 92% workforce was women. And they were not small. Some of them were about 2,000, some of them were slightly smaller, slightly bigger, but no unions. And we studied about 4 of those units to understand what drives that behavior. And we were very pleasantly surprised that the productivity was the highest in those factories. And because people came, they came for earning, they went back without any other agenda. It suited. So when we set up a factory in Electronic City, our basic requirement for running the factory was 80% of the workforce must be women, including supervisory. So it makes difference. Now, sometimes there is an intent, but it doesn't get executed. And I'll quote one example without taking names. Consulting for an MD of a medium-sized engineering manufacturing company with plants in near further than Gurgaon, 4 factories. We realized that in the factory there were no women. So I asked the MD, young man, mid-40s, early 40s, that why don't we have? He said, "No, once you get women, then rules, regulation, too much of jhamela," the way he calls it, including washroom. So I said, this cannot be a stoppage from having women workforce, because let us try. So anyway, brainwashing him for some time, a vacancy came up for quality head. And I told him, I said, now we can't say we can't get women. Let's try for a position of that quality manager as gender-driven decision. We did find a very good lady, experienced, met all the criteria, and we were also hiring an assistant production manager. So I remember sitting down with him, interviewing the people, and then asking the CHR to make the offer. And I was overseas after that. So when I came back, I said, how are those 2 doing? 15 days later, he says, the production guy has settled down well. And for the other position, I thought when you come back, we'll discuss. Because remember the other candidate, he was also pretty good. I mean, this is bias. That you have a candidate, you have a second candidate who's not as good as the woman, and then you come and say, this time let us do one thing. I think that guy is equally good. Equally good is not good enough. You have to make sure that women are deliberately put in positions of decision making, as well as we make a conscious decision for that. Now, when you look at the whole aspect, you've got to provide facilities. The organization has to walk a little extra mile. And sometimes for business reason. When pagers were there, I don't know how many of you are familiar. In the 94 time, we had a pager for short while before SMS came. And there was this whole center where you dial in your message. The message would get typed out by those ladies. We had a call center in Bangalore behind one school. I forget the name of the school, but I would always notice at lunchtime that all these mothers would gather at the gate and have a powwow. In the morning, they would all come to drop the children, and then they pick them up around 12:30 or 1 o'clock. Something struck me that they go home after dropping the child at 7:30 or 8 and come back by 12:30, 1 o'clock. Can we have a shift for that period? Because it's a very strenuous job. So we created a shift from 8:30 to 12:30, and then we went to those mothers, would you like to work here? Just upstairs, next building. And we were surprised that so many volunteered to work, they were earning money, they were sitting in an air-conditioned office, they don't have to go home, and they were picking up the children at the end of the work. Attrition zero attrition. And in the afternoon, there's another set of women coming in. So I think we have to be creative in HR to make sure that this bias is actually suppressed. Decision making can be done if you make sure that you are likely to fall into trap of bias. Now, but doing all this, we must measure. The idea is that we should not just wish for bias to be going away and diversity to be increased. So one of the things that when I came back from Malaysia and joined IBM, we realized that IBM was doing phenomenally well in diversity. I mean, this is one of the leading organizations. But in certain businesses, the gender was about 16.7, and I took 2 of the verticals. 16.7 was a shame number for a company like IBM. So set with the HR team, the recruitment team, and that day we decided we will move to 27% in 24 months. Don't ask me why 27. Maybe because that's my daughter's birth date. So it sounded easy for me to remember 27. But sometimes having crazy targets works. So we agreed as a team, we'll go to 27% in less than 24 months. And every Thursday, we used to have a review of recruitment, 1 hour discussion globally. And just that the business is growing very fast with 1,700 to 1,900 people being hired every month. Now, I introduced one column. How many CVs came from women? And 2 weeks later, how many were interviewed? Moment you start pressing those buttons, how many CVs came, how many were interviewed, numbers of women hired started going up. Because earlier it was very easy to say, CV nahi aaya, so, like we can't wait for CVs to come, we're not getting the right fit. These are all excuses. The moment you get very hard nosed, I want to measure everything. How many CVs, how many interviews, how many offers made, how many offers refused to join. And if that is the type of situation, then you start seeing that your number and your goals per target. Now, look at the other way around. Women want to be treated equally. It's not a bias is because women want special treatment. It's a wrong notion to feel that women want special treatment. They want to sort of have a special concession. And one last example, in Shell Malaysia, we used to hire a bunch of very high power, high potential trainees on the scheme Gurami. This is all from India, from also some from Harvard. And one year, one Korean lady came to me and said, I want to raise an issue. And raising an issue in Shell is a very big thing. It's either concerning ethics or violation of a company policy or values. So I was a little concerned. I said, oh my God, now what are we heading for? So when we had a meeting, she said, every trainee shows they have to rig for 15 days. And rig is about 35 minutes by chopper in the high seas, anywhere, in North Sea or in Borneo, wherever it is. And we are not doing that. My schedule does not show rig. Now, till that time, we never used to send women to rig, thinking it's a men's world. It's very tough there. It's risky also. And then we sat down with our production people and the rig people, and we decided what is the risk there? Risk is not about sexual harassment. It's a clean company and we can take care of that. The physical risk of crossing, there's something called a widow's bridge in a rig, where from the drilling to the area where it is processed, that bridge is dangerous and a lot of lives are lost. It's called widow's bridge. So that is the only risk, physical risk. We try to do away with those and take precautions, and we send that Korean lady to the rig. Amazing transformation in the rig. If she could work for something like 15 to 18 hours, then people don't complain after that. So, having non-biased situation, non-discrimination is good for business. At the end of the day, I would like to put forward that, we can actually shape the direction of the company to go in the right direction, paying special attention to diversity. We can talk about different diversity, but here we talk about gender. And when right now with working from home, we have seen one thing, that the level field has come in. Work done by men and women is almost same working from home. So that breaks one of the myth that women need special treatment, they have to look after the family, they can't attend time, they have to go early, they can't travel. Men also cannot. Right now, men are in the same situation what 5 months ago women were accused of having a need for special concession. Let's break this bias mentally. Demand hard work, hard output from women. They're willing to give, and it's good for business, it's good for diversity. So overall, I feel that bias is in the mind. It is not in the business. There's no constraint on running the business without bias. It is only question that some of us have this hidden, and I like the title, unconscious. We do it because I mean the gentleman, the MD, who said that we don't have a washroom in a factory, so how can they hire women? These are unconscious bias speaking, rationalizing our inaction to be fair and be equal opportunity. So I feel I missed all the learning from the subsequent panel discussion, but I know that I'll just share this few thoughts with you that it is good for business. And if it's good for business, it's good for HR, it's good for gender diversity, and it's good for us to thrive and measure that the drive that we do is measured and implemented. With that, I will,
Sure.
unless there are a few questions, I would be more than happy to answer Advait. And thank you for inviting me, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Maybe because we are short of time, I'll just have one question. That a lot of discussion happens when when you want diversity or don't want discrimination. Then like you said, you want to move from 16% to 27%. So you are consciously doing a recruitment in favor of a particular category of employees. Is that fair?
If I understood your lot of echo, but if I understood your question, that we want to implement diversity, but we cannot, is it?
No, when we want to implement diversity or therefore reduce bias or reduce discrimination, like the example you gave, you had 16% and you moved it to 27% over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So is that fair for people who are not in that category?
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear properly, but if I can guess your question, that if there is a, okay, I don't know to guess the question, you have to repeat slowly maybe.
Okay, when you are moving specifically from a 16% to say 27%,
yeah,
in your example, because of a particular program that you have, for the cause of removing bias, removing discrimination, improving the diversity, is that fair for categories who are not included in your program?
I won't say it's unfair. We are trying to increase the gender balance. 27 is not a very, very big number. If I had said 47 or 57, that people would have said that, oh, we are going over the board. But I don't think it's unfair on any section. When you decide that you are correcting an imbalance, Advait, the 16 is an imbalance. It's a wrong thing to do. You must take action to make it to 27, and then in next 2 years we actually went up to 34%. So you don't rest. When you take on agenda for a workplace without bias, you have to find out where the bias is happening and actually come down heavily on people who exhibit bias in one way or the other. If there's unconscious, counsel them, guide them, coach them. If it is deliberate, and there are cases, and all my panel members will agree, there are people who just bypass this and have a deliberate bias, and then come down heavily on them that this is not the intent of the organization.
Yeah. Okay, understood. Thank you so much, Aquil, for sparing your time and sharing your thoughts. And
sorry, I missed my learning, but thank you for inviting me, and I know I missed my learning from this session, but thank you so much for just.
Thanks for your time and thanks for your inputs, and we'll pick this up again when we start the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now over to you, Eklavya.
Thank you so much. Advait, is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Now, after those opening remarks and quite a lot of food for thought from Dr. Aquil, we'll move on to the book summary. Okay. So Trevor Noah is regarded as one of South Africa's biggest exports, the boy from the ghetto who made it big in the promised land and ended up hosting The Daily Show, one of the most popular and incisive satirical news programs on Comedy Central. And one of the reasons he could become a world famous entertainer is probably because comedy was his only defense mechanism to process a lifetime of pain and poverty. Born a Crime is an enthralling and vivid depiction of Trevor's early childhood in South Africa under the apartheid government, and also the first few years of democratic rule by the nation's black majority. Forced removal of the indigenous population coupled with slavery, followed by segregation. That is begin to understand it, because we cannot. I mean, all of these things have probably happened in other countries and other cultures, but it seems that none of these three things, removal, slavery, and segregation, none of these three things have ever happened simultaneously in a single race. And that is what apartheid was all about. And it was actually effective because even though the black South Africans outnumbered the white South Africans nearly 5-1, they were divided into different tribes with different languages, with long-standing animosity between them, even before the first white man stepped foot in South Africa. The white rulers used that inbred hatred to divide and conquer them all for decades. All this bitterness was actually reined in by a common enemy until Nelson Mandela brought an end to apartheid. But as Mandela walked out of prison a free man, black South Africa went to war with itself. Democracy's victory over apartheid is called the Bloodless Revolution. And according to Trevor Noah, it is called the Bloodless Revolution because precious little white blood was actually shed during this revolution, whereas black blood filled the streets of South Africa. All this and much more has been brought to life by Trevor in this book with humor, depth, and sincerity. Let's understand apartheid a bit better to gain some context. So apartheid laws were designed to keep the black people under total control, and a full compendium of these laws would actually run into 3,000 pages and weigh nearly 5 kgs. One of these laws was the Immorality Act. It was illegal for blacks to have sex with Europeans, and that's exactly what Patricia Noah did. A rebellious black woman with an indomitable spirit and an unwavering faith in Jesus, she did not conform to the rules of the police state and yearned for a free life. She ran away from her family home in the segregated township of Soweto and started living in downtown Johannesburg, where it was actually illegal for blacks to reside. She survived by hiding and sleeping in public restrooms and learned from prostitutes how to remain on the move constantly without being noticed by the police. She took up a job as a typist, which was unheard of in society back then because black women were only supposed to work in factories or as maids. She fell in love with a Swiss man who abhorred the idea of apartheid, and even though they could not legally be married to each other, she insisted on having a child with him that she could raise and call her own. So enter Trevor Noah, half white, half black, born a crime. For the longest time, Trevor had to be hidden away because he was a proof of his parents' criminality rather than their love. He couldn't be seen in public with his father, and if all three were walking outside, his father would actually have to walk across the street from them. As a toddler, he once started running after his father, calling him daddy, and people around them started looking in surprise. His father had to feign ignorance and ran away from his own child. Trevor probably thought he had the coolest parents in the world because they kept wanting to play hide and seek with him. In fact, he couldn't even walk with his mother because a black woman had no business being around a light-skinned child unless she was his nanny. She used to take him out with the help of another colored woman who would hold Trevor, and she would walk a few paces behind, pretending to be the colored woman's maid. It wasn't much easier when he used to go with his mother to her family home in Soweto, where nearly 1 million black people were forced to live together in a few square kilometers. He had to be kept hidden there as well because a colored boy was an anomaly in a predominantly black neighborhood. Funnily enough, being light-skinned worked to his advantage because his grandmother would never beat him up, unlike the other grandkids who would regularly get a hiding. She was worried because the one time that she actually did lay her hands on him, his light skin turned all shades of blue and red, and his grandmother was mortally scared of raising her hand against what looked like a white paw. Trevor gives us a glimpse into how unsafe and violent his childhood was. When he was 9 years old, he was returning home from church in a minibus with his mother and baby brother. The bus driver and his accomplice started insulting and threatening his mother with dire consequences because they felt she had no business being out alone at night, and moreover, she belonged to a rival tribe. They were taking her to a desolate spot to rape and murder her when Patricia threw Trevor out of the moving bus and leaped out with her baby tucked between her arms. They ran for their lives with the two men chasing them down with weapons, But years of practice of Patricia running after the mischievous Trevor all over the neighborhood probably helped them evade certain death that night. Through poverty, violence, and abuse, Trevor Noah's mother committed to make a better life for her son. Most importantly, she taught him how to think, which is something that the school could not do. Even though he kept getting into trouble at school, she made sure that he knew what was right from wrong. And through scolding and tough love at times, she helped him understand that life is full of pain, but you let the pain sharpen you rather than holding on to it constantly. It's all very good and cliched to tell people to follow their dreams, but you can only dream of what you can imagine. And if you came from the ghetto in South Africa, your imagination can frankly be quite limited. She taught him that it's okay to dream of a better life and not get bogged down by what she termed as the black tax. Black tax is paid by somebody who is trying to get out of the fate that is condemned for the black populace. The generations who come before you have been robbed of dignity, skills, and education to move forward in life. So you lose everything just trying to bring everyone behind you back up from zero. School was equally tough for Trevor because he had to constantly choose sides, whether he wanted to hang out with the black kids or the white kids. The problem was that his thought process was white, but he identified himself as black. He taught in English, but was equally fluent in most of the African languages. And unlike the white kids, he was quite poor, so that is probably what gravitated him more towards the black children. However, they were also reluctant to accept him as one of their own because he was colored, which put him somewhat in the muddling middle. Trevor learned early on that racism exists, and even if it's not happening to you, it does not mean that it's not taking place. And at some point, you have to choose black or white. You have to pick a side. You can say, oh, I don't take sides, but at some point, life will force you to pick a side. Now, Trevor didn't help his cause much by constantly getting into a series of misadventures. He had numerous run-ins at the school and outside, much to his mother's exasperation, from burning down a white family's house because he was playing with matches and a magnifying glass, to narrowly escaping juvenile prison on account of shoplifting. He was shoplifting liquor chocolates from a store in the local mall one night with a classmate when the security guard caught sight of them. A long chase ensued, and in the process, his friend got apprehended. Trevor thought he had escaped scot-free until he was summoned to the principal's office the next day. Since he was the culprit's best friend, the police wanted to interrogate him. He feared that they had discovered it was him, but luckily his friend did not snitch on him. They in fact wanted to show him the footage from the mall CCTV camera to check if he could identify the other person. He was shocked when he saw the footage and realized that the police couldn't identify him because the camera lens did not know how to process the image of a colored boy, since its technology was limited only to reproducing black or white images. So instead of a colored boy, the camera showed a pale-faced Caucasian boy, and probably for the only time in his life, years of institutionalized racism and ignorance came to his rescue. But you know what they say, life comes back full circle. A few years later, he was actually racially profiled for driving a car which looked beyond his means, and he was sent to prison for that misdemeanor. In the meantime, Patricia fell in love with the black man Abel, who she couldn't see for what he really was, an abusive misogynist. She was blinded by his charm and good looks and failed to recognize the devil within. Soon after their marriage, Abel forbade Trevor from visiting his father, and as a result, Trevor did not see his birth father again until he was 24 years old. Patricia became a mother again, while Trevor was regularly beaten up by Abel. Patricia tried to shield him from his stepfather while being at the receiving end of regular assault and drunken beatings. She tried several times to seek the help of police, but like racism, patriarchy was also embedded deep within the society. Every single time she was told by the cops to be an obedient wife and not give her husband a reason to get angry with her. Naturally, as soon as Trevor completed his high school, he was sent to live on his own by his mother out of concern for his safety. He begged her to move in with him, but she knew that her husband would kill her if she took that step. With no money and no possibility of higher education, Trevor turned to what he knew best, hustling in the hood. For the next couple of years, until he chanced upon stand-up comedy and made a name for himself across the country, he survived by making pirated music CDs and selling them in the rough townships. He quickly made a name for himself as the go-to person for latest music at throwaway prices and soon became a DJ of local repute as well. He started performing at street parties and began a side business of extending short-term loans to other people. While it was meager money and probably just about enough to see him through one day at a time, it was still big money for someone with no prospects and destined to a life of abject poverty, solely by virtue of the skin color that he was born with. And that's probably the problem with racism, which we don't understand, and Trevor breaks it down for us. People love to say, give a man to fish, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. However, if you teach a man how to fish, he will eat for a lifetime. What they don't say is that it would also be nice if you gave the person a fishing rod, because he probably cannot even afford that in the first place. That is the critical piece of the jigsaw puzzle which is sorely missing, and the reason why it is not possible for everyone to rise above the fate. The book comes to a climactic ending when a few years later Trevor receives a phone call from his half-brother to inform him that Abel had shot Patricia in the head. In a fit of rage and fury, Abel first shot Patricia in the leg and then shot her in the face from point-blank range. But miraculously enough, the next 4 bullets came out blank and she could manage to run away from him and get into the car. She was about to drive away when Abel shot the final bullet from behind the car and it went through her head, leaving her for dead. Somehow, her younger son drove her to the hospital and Trevor reached there absolutely shattered and broken. He was told repeatedly by the nurse that he should let her go and not risk going in for surgery because he would not be able to afford the crippling debt of surgery and hospital bills. That's the other thing with poverty. A poor life comes with a price tag attached to it. For a moment, Trevor was reminded of the black tax that his mother had warned him about. For a split second, he thought that at 50 years of age, she had probably lived a full life and he could actually end up being in credit card debt for the next 20 years if the nurse's words came true. Fortunately, the story has a happy ending. He insisted that the hospital should treat her immediately, and to everybody's surprise, Patricia had a miraculous recovery within a few days. It turned out that the bullet wound in the leg was only a flesh wound, and the bullet in the head somehow missed the arteries, it missed the veins, the eyes, the nostrils, and went straight through. That is probably the result of her unwavering faith in God. So she lived to tell the tale, and this book is actually Trevor's loving ode to Patricia Noah, his mother and the book's real hero. However, not everything is peachy in this story. At the end, Abel was let go with only a rap on his knuckles, and to this day, he continues to live only a few blocks away from Patricia in Johannesburg. Apartheid was finally defeated in South Africa only to be replaced by other societal evils. And India is no beacon of shining light either. It's a pity that we have to conduct a dialogue around discrimination today in 2020, but the reality is that systemic racism, bias, prejudice, and bigotry are very much prevalent in our society and even in our workplace. One thing that I'm sure all of us have heard a lot in the last few months is that there is a new normal likely to emerge post-COVID. Well, if that's the case, I urge that let empathy be your new normal. And by chance, if you're already tired of listening to discrimination and racism and bias and Black Lives Matter, imagine how tired those might be who are subjected to it on a daily basis. Thank you for listening in. I'm Eklavya Malhotra, and over to Advait now for the main feature of our evening.
Thanks, Eklavya. Thanks for the wonderful, as always, succinct kind of an interesting summary of the book. Can I request the panelists to, yeah, okay, Harjeet, Amita, and Padmaja. Okay. So let me start with you, Padmaja. I think we'll start where perhaps Aquil left. And, you know, there were more questions that have come in when he was talking. So I'll maybe start with that. And he focused a lot in terms of the gender bias and the gender discrimination part of it. And like I mentioned in my opening remarks, you know, ideally we would have done this session physically, but here we are in an online mode because most of us are work from home. Now, Padmaja, what are your views? This work from home is itself going to be discriminatory for from a gender bias perspective? To be direct, is it going to be not so good for women who are working in offices but now are working from home? What's your view on that?
Padmaja ma'am,
you're
we
on
would
mute.
request if you unmute yourself, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. Am I audible now? I'm sorry about that. I didn't
Yeah.
realize I was still on mute. All right. I was just saying thank you for having me here and good evening to everyone. Everyone is well and safe. Interesting question, Advait. You know, in many ways, I think the current times are proving to be a leveler, right? So if we think about it, some of the historical perceptions and realities, there's always the perception at in many organizations that those who stay back late are contributing more, right? So that's a perception. There is a perception that you know, those who are available to come in you know, beyond office hours or on weekends are contributing more. And while intellectually, I think many leaders do recognize that it's about what you contributed and not about how long you're there. But you know, perception also sometimes plays a role, right? So in a way, as Aquil said, this is a leveler because now it's really a focus on what you deliver, right? Not availability. Having said that, I think there's also a lot of evidence that women across classes are actually taking a greater load of the you know, the working during the pandemic, and we've all read so much about it, right? Where today it's greater pressure to juggle, you know, personal and professional responsibilities. So there is, in many senses, that dimension as well. So I think it will be, I personally am hopeful that this would be a more leveling playing field in many areas, and many organizations actually gain from this, from that, in that context. But I think we have to be mindful that there is also a greater load. Therefore, the need for policies clearly clarifying, not only for women, but gender agnostic. What are the kind of working hours? When do you need to be available, right? When do you get your downtime? Respect for personal professional boundaries. I think it's important.
Okay. The reason I brought this up, Padmaja, was because I was just reading the HBR latest article that got published yesterday, actually, and they have said that, you know, once people start coming back to office, and I think some of the things that you have mentioned, that, you know, the load, obviously, bulk of the load at home is still being done, obviously, by the women folk at home. But when you know, this back to office kind of thing starts, and there are going to be challenges that, you know, it's going to be hybrid model for most of the large organizations. Will it be discriminatory against people who work in office versus work from home? Will it be discriminatory for people who can't travel or are still afraid to travel versus people who say, yeah, I don't have an issue with travel? In the next couple of months, till, you know, as they say, the vaccine gets found, and not just found, but all of us get vaccinated, and therefore it is absolutely safe to travel again. What are your views there?
So again, interesting question, and I guess in many ways we are all looking ahead, right? Crystal ball gazing in a sense. Personally, I think it's not going to be back to the way it was, because so many organizations are now, what has happened in the last few months? One is that the big myth that you cannot work remote and it's not efficient, that has in many ways got busted, right? Or while many organizations actually had IT infrastructure in place, but there was always this niggling thing that teams are more effective when they're in person. There's no doubt that for many situations you do do better when you have an in-person collaboration, right? Or whether it's on mentoring. But I think the fact that we can, a good proportion of what we're expected to being remote locations, in many ways that has also been established, right? It was not a choice, it had to be done, and yeah, it worked better than many people thought it would. Therefore, I think most organizations will rethink operating models. I mean, I don't think majority would not go back 100% the way it was earlier. So I would think that this hybrid model is something that is going to exist, right? And I hope that means that if there's enough appreciation of the fact that you can continue to deliver what you have to, coming in 1 day a week, 2 days a week versus all 5 or 5.5 or 6 days, that's a great step forward, right? So I think that would be an advantage. But then by nature, I'm also a bit of I tend to see the glass half full and be optimistic. So I'm hopeful that the hybrid model, I don't think it will be 100% remote working. I don't think it should be, because so much of culture and DNA and values get shaped with a combination of both, right? So I don't think it should be 100% remote, but I think the hybrid model, hopefully, some of the biases will be less relevant in that context.
Okay, great. Okay. Coming to you, Harjeet, generally the talk so far has been on the biggest bias or discrimination one sees, which is gender-based. But from your perspective, what are the other kinds of discrimination that exist, not just on paper in theory, but in Indian organizations?
Look, one is stop seeing that discrimination is a problem.
Okay. Wow.
Discrimination. Okay. Look, how we are programmed is that we classify information, because there are so many people. What we try to do is, moment we get something, we classify, and then we start attributing certain things to, okay, this classification has these attributes, because that is how we remember. That is how your machine learning works, or that is how your mind works.
Sure.
So let me start with an example. I was traveling in a Uber, full-time story. So I was traveling in a Uber, and I saw that the gentleman who was there was a bit old. So I asked him, he was kind of, I thought 60, 65. I asked him, why are you driving Uber? He said, I used to work for a company. I got retired, but my responsibilities did not. So that's why I'm driving Uber.
Okay.
Now, tell me, the guy has a skill, but since we are working with the age limit of 58 years for retirement, suddenly you are not of any use in the workforce. You would have seen with a lot of professionals who just cross the age, and after that their compensation drops, like as if the years of experience they have accumulated is not of any worth. Is it not discrimination?
Interesting.
Education. We discriminate on the basis of education. You ask somebody, I want full-time MBA. Are you looking at a skill, or are you looking at MBA? If somebody has done MBA from IGNOU, are you looking at whether the person is qualified to work? Our problem is we have too many people in India. So what we do is we put a filter criteria, and those filter criteria are called discriminatory criteria, because you are not looking at the core thing for which you are deciding that whether the person will be able to do the job or not. You are just putting filters.
Yeah. Sure.
I used to work for a. You want me to stop? Okay, you can tell me shut up.
Yeah, please.
I used to work for a US organization. So there we had, like, we acquired a US company, and it was a bunch of Indian people. Yeah, basically, it was a mixed company. Large portion of the company was led by Indians.
Okay.
When we were having the merger meeting, after the merger happened, a lady came to me. She was one of the senior persons in the company, and she said, you know, in our community, people don't like that you're working for an Indian company. That time I realized, okay, nationality or from where you are coming, that is also a problem.
Yeah.
So if you see discrimination criteria, there are n number of discrimination criteria. It can be age, gender, region, education, nationality, race, religion.
Yeah. And all of them exist even in India. I mean, it's not just the gender or kind of thing. Like you said, like you gave those examples.
Look, for India, I will give you another example. So I had a very good friend.
Yeah.
We developed a relationship. He was in sales. So one day he was sitting with me and he asked me, तुम लोग HR में करते क्या हो? What do you do in HR? And
fundamental question.
His fundamental question was, he did not know what these people are getting paid for. He used to think, we sell and you are overheads, we feed you, and we don't know why we are feeding you. For him, that was a discrimination till the time he understood what I did.
Okay. Yeah. Very different perspective on discrimination there. Lovely. Okay. Thanks, and I'll come back to you on that, Harjeet. Amita, coming to you now. Again, going back to what Aquil said, and he mentioned two things. One was on this second innings part of it, and the other was in terms of whether marriage was just a woman's need, and there are a lot of questions or concerns expressed on that comment. Would you like to say anything on that?
Very good evening to you all. Thank you for having me. We are into something which is we really didn't expect. I'm audible, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I'm sure all of you are safe, taking care of yourselves. Now, the book. Yeah. So thank you so much for selecting the book, Born a Crime, because we have seen what happened with George Floyd in the US and how it triggered, the protest across the world, Black Lives Matter. So much needed conversation. So thank you for selecting that book. Very appropriate. Now, couple of points which Harjeet made. I defer when he says discrimination is not a crime. Discrimination is, of course, a crime. And as we understand the language of sin, so in the societal language, in the societal context, discrimination is a sin. And in the corporate language, discrimination is a crime. Because what is discrimination? Discrimination is letting the other individual know that you don't belong here, right? So when nobody has the right to tell the other individual that you don't belong here. And that's why in the societal context, discrimination is a sin, and in the corporate context, discrimination is a crime. Now, I think maybe because of the line issues, I couldn't really get your question. So if you can repeat for me, that would really help.
Yeah. So, you mentioned discrimination, you define it as, make other person feel that you don't belong. So for women who post their maternity, take a sabbatical, take a break and want to come back, a lot of corporates make them feel that, if they don't belong, they're not required. Their positions are not guaranteed, their seniority is not guaranteed. What are your views on that? Is that happening?
See, now, of course, as Padmaja also mentioned, we also need to look at the positivity also. So first, maybe I'll touch base upon the positivity, and then I'll come back to the, the negative aspect of it. So the positive aspect is, of course, a lot of organizations are running initiatives like coming back to work or work vapsi. These are some amazing initiatives which are being run, which really encourage such women who have taken sabbatical due to these family responsibilities. Also, these organizations are not really considering this as a break in their career progression. So neither it's impacting their, let's say, performance ratings, the annual performance ratings, nor it's being considered in terms of career progression, or when they're considered for any higher hierarchical positions. So that's really a very good move. Plus, the organizations are supporting the maternity leaves. Now we have 6 months maternity leave. Plus, organizations are also supporting, pregnancy in terms of monetary benefits. So maybe the MNCs are presently doing it, who are very proactive in this aspect. Small scale organizations, due to their limitations, maybe in terms of capital, are not able to do it, but definitely they need to do it. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the negative side of it, so somewhere the negative side of it lies in the bias, so as we talk about the hiring conversations, more often than not, the hiring conversations are also, let's not hire a woman because she'll go on a maternity leave, so that is where there is this doubt, rather than focusing on the potential of that candidate fit for job, the gender is being considered because she will take a sabbatical due to her maternity. Yeah. And that's where
there was a lot of discussion about this when the government came out with the 6-month rule.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's where, this majoritarian rule come into picture. What we see right now in the corporate world, the majority of the population is the privileged gender or men. So that's how, when it comes to driving the culture is being weaved or built up based on their thinking, their thought processes. And certain thought processes are around self-righteousness. So basically, self-righteousness are those individuals who are often intolerant of the opinions and behaviors of others. So they think what I am doing, what I think is the only option, or my way or the highway, or what I say is correct, is right. So that's where they fail to see people as equals, and that's where they tend to discount women when it comes to policy formation, or when it comes to thinking in terms of equality. And that is what the root cause of the problem that you have mentioned.
Understood. I'll come back to you on the gender part again the next round, Amita. Back to you, Harjeet. You mentioned about you having worked for a US company also, and my question actually I wanted to ask you there itself, but I'll come now. Have you seen any difference between multinational companies and Indian companies as far as discrimination bias is concerned? You mentioned about working for Indian companies or Indian people, but even in the US you have this Ivy League old boys network, and I prefer somebody who's from my college or select 5-6 colleges. Is that also discrimination? Is that also bias? It's not just an Indian thing, is it?
Okay, I will answer this question. Let me just clarify what Amita said in terms of crime.
Right. Yeah, I don't think you said that.
So, I did not mean that. Look, suppressing anyone is a crime. But when we talk about, say, discrimination in theoretical sense, or say in terms of research, So when you go through HR research or psychology research on this topic, you will find that it is a normal human process, that this is how we process information. If we don't understand that this is how we process information and there is a bias which will come, point is how we are going to take care of that bias. That is how we should think towards it, because it is a natural thing. If you suppress, it is going to give you wrong results. And if you encourage, that is also encouraging, that is a crime. But if you find something out, then how to fix it, that is what organizations do. Organizations are there to do business, and that is what they should focus on. While focusing on this, let me come to your question, that MNC and Indian context. Look, it depends upon how the upbringing is.
Okay.
Like in our case, the way our country has been, caste used to be a big issue. Gender used to be a big issue. Religion used to be a big issue. We are a country of languages. So language is also a big issue. Region is a big issue. So in India, what happens is our discrimination happens in these boundaries. In US, if you start looking at nationality, since a lot of people from different nations have come in US, you go to a US eating joint, so you will find that different kinds of foods are available. So for them, nationality, they feel that, okay, these guys have come in and they are going to take our positions. So you can call it reverse. I will not call it reverse discrimination, but that is also what they feel when they interact with someone. Now, thing is, when you start knowing somebody at a personal level, then those biases start going away. US society has been very open, that black and white thing. If you see, I have seen lot many white families have adopted children which are black. That is how they are solving that bias.
Okay.
So in India, how we have solved this bias is, you would have seen reservation. You can see reservation as a bad thing, like the question which you asked to Aquil. But a lot of women and a lot of people, that caste bias, how it has reduced, because a lot of people have come from different castes in the working culture. We started knowing each other, and when you know somebody, then all those factors slowly move out of your mind. That is what is more important.
Sure. Great. Padmaja, let me pick on to what Aquil and now even Harjeet mentioned about this reservation part of it. Without calling it reservation, but a conscious bias towards, Aquil mentioned this 16% to 27%, or consciously hiring a particular kind of people, etc., etc. Now the question is, what happens to meritocracy then?
What happens to meritocracy?
The other question, meritocracy, when you are trying to sort of have, if I can use the word forced diversity or a conscious diversity, is it at the cost of meritocracy?
Yeah, actually, interesting point. So I think let me first step back and say why this is a debate on why are we. So I know we are focusing this discussion on gender, and there's so many other elements, but let me respond on gender since that was your question. So from a gender perspective, why is it important, right? I mean, just to put it very, very simply. So say in our business, right? We are professional services. We look at, providing solutions on different areas to clients. We're seeing more and more that our clients want to know what's the composition of your team, right? Is it a diverse team? Why do they do that? Because they genuinely believe that there would be a better outcome, right? If you have a team which is diverse, you would have a better outcome. In some other countries, like in the UK, the regulator is saying that among the audit firms, what is the diversity? How many of your lead partners of the FTSE 500 are women, as an example, right?
Okay.
Even in so many other things, right? If you look at other teams and you start saying that if you really want, teams to debate and point out on areas which seem risky, you need people with different mindsets. You need people from different genders. So the first part of this whole question is, why is it even important? And I think pretty soon our market and everybody will show us that people don't have a choice. Okay? The second thing is, therefore, you need to have more representation. Also because I think studies, again, we've seen that you need an ecosystem. If you have, say, in a factory, you have 100 people and you have one woman, right? It's that much more difficult versus in a scenario where you have 10 or 20, because when there's a minimum ecosystem, then you have more of a virtuous cycle where it's easier to integrate and speak up, right? Now, what do you do in this situation? So first is we're saying it's being done not because everybody believes that, you know, it's good, that too, but clearly there's a compelling reason that you believe as an organization you require to have a diverse workforce. So then you have to go out, you have to source, you have to find sources of tapping of diverse talent, and it's not always that easy. And you have to take a 3 to 5 year view, right? Sometimes much longer, 10-year view, to say that if I want to work towards, excuse me, like the European boards, right? Or they say that we want to have 25% diversity, we want to have 50% diversity. You have to work towards it, which means you go out, you source, you develop, you build. So you have to take a medium to long-term view of this whole point on meritocracy. It's not a very short-term thing that, you know, okay, I'm hiring one woman where I could have hired a man. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. It has to be looked at much more systemic manner.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but, you know, while the focus so far has been gender, like Harjeet mentioned, there could be several others, like, you know, language, caste, community, you know, culture, region. So, you know, when you're trying to sort of have a diverse, and I was surprised when you said some of the clients asked that is your team diverse. So, you know, in the name of, you know, non-discrimination or diversity, is it okay for people to say that, okay, I want people in my office from all regions, or you know, northeast, southwest, or different religions, or people who speak different languages, or of course gender, and including you know, LGBTQ. Is it right to have that kind of conscious kind of decision? Not just gender. It is across all the kinds of diversities or all the kinds of non-discriminations that we are talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So I would look at it from two dimensions, Advait. The first is that I think our organizations have to be a microcosm of society, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, say if I'm a consumer-facing organization, like I'm assuming, Harjeet, if you want to know what your customers want, your organization has to reflect in a way what your customers are, right? So our organizations have to be a microcosm of the broader society, and we have to have all the elements of society, right? Now, how far would I take it? Would I say that therefore in my organization, I want exact representation as of all communities, all states? That may be difficult to do. That may be taking it, you know, very far, because it's not that easy to do, right? I would think in something as fundamental as gender, it's certainly possible and desirable to do it, right? Whether you start extrapolating that to many other aspects as well, I guess in every organization has to make its own call. But I would think teams that have representation across different parts of the country, people coming from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, would be much more vibrant, right? Whether we want to carve it up to states and communities, I mean, I think that's a call for every take. That may be taking it, that may be difficult to do, maybe taking it.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, the thought process has to be there. It not be the same percentages kind of thing. So this is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not about the mathematical thing. And maybe the second point I want to say is, it's not only about the representation. That's where the inclusion comes in, right? So that is where that even if I'm the only person from a certain background, I feel I can speak up. I feel that my voice will be heard, right? I feel nobody's looking at me with, you know, lenses and saying, okay, what does this person know? So I have a point of view. I don't even speak up. So that's where the inclusion part of it. So one is the representation of diverse backgrounds. The other is the culture where you feel enabled to speak up and, you know, free to voice your opinion.
Sure. But speaking with you, one more thing is, you know, for example, how do you change the mindset? I mean, I had mentioned when I was, you know, we were discussing with, I was asking Amita that, you know, after this Indian law came about 6 months maternity leave, there was serious discussions across, people I know in different companies that will this go against hiring women people or young women people who are unmarried or are likely to get married and therefore they're likely to, go on maternity leave and should and especially for MSMEs, can they really afford that cost? Is what how unfortunately they were looking at it. So how do you change this mindset that I don't want to hire a young woman because I might have to bail her out for 6-9 months of paid leave?
So the question is for me, right?
So I think it's a very fair question. And
sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry, Amita.
No, as in because I think there was
please.
a disturbance in the line. The question is for Padmaja or the question is for me. Can you clarify, please?
No, the question was still for Padmaja.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll come to you.
But do vein, Amita. I'll just keep my answer short and you can vein. So I was going to say that I think it's a very fair question. And I would think for an MSME, it's also a question of if you have a small workforce, right? Can you really afford to have, is it just financially viable? And I think it's a very, very fair question, right? And I can understand that it may be difficult in situations. It's like during the pandemic, I mean, all organizations want to carry workforce to the extent they can, but in some situations, it's just not financially possible, and I can empathize. But I would think that for many of our organizations, it's not the same situation. We can and we should, right?
Sure.
Because this is where we can actually take a view of, it's not about thinking of those 6 months, right? It's really about thinking about, I mean, the entire talent, you want to build careers 30 years, 40 years, and 6 months is a very small part of it. I think many of our organizations can afford to think bigger, and we should. Yeah.
Sure. Amita, your views on this, and I have another question for you.
Yeah, sure. So just adding up to what Padmaja and Harjeet were saying, see around the business case. So what does our history tell us? If you look at couple of product failures, like for example, when the airbags, so car safety airbags were launched as a product, it was a failure because in the product life cycle, only men were involved. They only tested it against men bodies, and that's where when the product was launched, it failed to protect women bodies. When the voice recognition system was launched, it failed to recognize female or other voices because the testing happened only for male voices. Similarly, when the face recognition system was launched, it failed to detect, or it branded black people as gorillas because in testing, no diversity was included as part of testing. Even for YouTube, we all know how popular YouTube is. When YouTube launched their video upload feature, there were a lot of glitches initially. They couldn't understand why the glitches are happening. Later on, they realized they only made the feature in a way that video shot with your right hand can be uploaded. So they completely discounted people who are left-handed. So understand, when you are launching the solution, your solution should cater to all the segments of the society. And when you discount diversity in your product life cycle, that's how you are discounting those consumers. Yeah. Now when
fantastic point you're making there.
Yeah.
Just to add to what you're saying, everybody's wearing masks these days, and there are these designer masks, and silver masks, and diamond masks, and gold masks. And just today, I saw an article in the newspaper here locally that there are masks that are transparent, so that people who can't hear you are challenged differently. They can read your lips and they can understand what you're saying. So somebody made transparent masks. So obviously that's again different kind of consideration that you're saying. It's a very interesting point. What about coming back to the work that you've been doing on diversity, inclusion, and especially LGBTQ? What has been your experience as far as discrimination in that category of kind of thing, rather than moving away from just gender?
Yeah, so because now the topic is very big in terms of societal discrimination, maybe I'll briefly touch base upon, and I'll talk about the possible measures in terms of the corporate world. Yeah, so the experiences. Okay, now we all know what happened with section 377. That's gone, done and dusted. Post section 377 era, it's about legal rights and protection at the workplace. And I'm really happy that Padmaja was constantly touch basing upon the point beyond gender, because your question were very specific to one gender. Yeah, we need to reinforce the thought process of going beyond gender when we talk about inclusion and diversity. And that's where, if you look at the legal rights and protection at the workplace, it's very binary presently. And that's where we are discriminating all those individuals, let's say, who do not fit into the binary definition. Yeah. So that's where now organizations really need to go beyond binaries. You know, now what are the actual issues then? Yeah. Look at our legal rights at the workplace. A cisgender man gets married, gets benefits, has a child, gets benefit from the organization, gets insurance coverage from the organization, but a gay man cannot get same benefits if he decides to marry another man. In fact, I doubt if that gay man will be, you know, able to create visibility and show the picture of proudly of his husband at the workplace, right? Now look at the gender.
Can I say something?
Sure,
Can I say something? You know, this year we changed our medical insurance cover to include same-sex partners. I just wanted to say that.
Fabulous.
Oh, wow.
High five for that. And not just you, a lot of other organizations are doing it, and that's really trailblazing ideas which these organizations are embracing. And that is what the need of the hour is. I mean, see, of course, the conventional biases, the conventional discrimination measures, we all know, but now we also need to pay attention to these other aspects of discrimination which is rampantly happening and which is equally grave. Now I was talking about the gender transition at workplace, right? How are you going to support an individual who decides to have a gender transition at the workplace in terms of legal rights and protection? Forget about the monetary support or benefit. Yeah, that's how now when you talk about equality, look at these aspects at the workplace. Yeah, and then how can we do it? So that's where uphold the diversity and inclusion with equality in its ethos. So organization now really need to wake up to the definition of diversity. You know, organization shouldn't be thinking diversity is, you know, just arranging a hiring drive for women. You have not understood. I mean, fine, you hire women, but when you hire diversity, along with comes the need for growth. How are you going to support their need, which might be different from the privileged gender, which is rampant at the corporate sector, when you are hiring the diversity? How are you going to support their maternity leave? And as Dr. Aquil rightly mentioned, I would say, it's, you know, having a family is like a, you know, need for everybody. It's not just about women, it's for men also. So if you're so considerate towards men, you need to be equally considerate towards women. Same is for the LGBTI plus community. You need to consider all their needs as their legal right at the workplace, you know. And I don't know whether we have time or should we go ahead with the next question, because you need to just stop me and
I will come back. I'll come back to you. Yeah. So Harjeet, we were talking now of, you know, moving beyond when we said discrimination or diversity is just beyond gender, and you yourself talked about 6 or 7 different kinds of discrimination that exist. Now, on one hand, we are seeing a lot of corporates, even large companies. I'm sure your company is also doing it because of the national presence. You are hiring people from not only metros but tier 2, 3, 4, even small towns and villages kind of people. Now, do you believe that this entire mindset of discrimination has root cause in our culture, our upbringing? You know, for lack of any other word, I'm calling it samskar, maybe superstition, maybe blind faith. And how do you then now, as 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 an organization as large as yours, how do you take care of this? Because it is again a bias that people in the city are less biased than people from smaller towns. How do you take care of that? And do you agree that there is what is the root cause of this bias that exists?
The root cause, like you rightly said, it comes from the culture around you and how you are living. Like in our environment, there was a cream called Fair and Lovely. In every day, if you hear Fair and Lovely, then you start thinking that fair is good. And when you think that fair is good, you start thinking that whosoever is not fair, that person is not that privileged. Moment, like everyone was talking about equality, moment you start thinking that we are not equal, the person who is fair is better, then you start discriminating because you want to become fair. In fact, Fair and Lovely changed their name because of that. Second is
you need to start glowing now.
Yeah, you need to start glowing now, which is a good move. So another thing you would have seen in our upbringing is padhoge likhoge to banoge nawab. So that means since beginning it has been told to you, if you are a sports person, then you are bad. तो आप खराब हो जाओगे. So point which we are, since beginning we say, use your right hand for doing things, don't use your left hand for doing things. So it all comes from society. I will not get into chotya, means small towns, big towns. So cultures are different in small towns and big towns. When you see large word, your mind opens up a bit. How to take care of these issues in the corporate environment, that is something which I would like to say, take some time. One is what we call as extended context hypothesis. This is one way of solving problems. Let me simplify this. So if you define that what is going to be the language of business, you would have seen whenever a meeting is happening, suddenly 4 people start talking in the regional language. So how do you solve that? You define that, okay, this is the language of business. You define a law enforcing equality where you say these are the values. You set up subordinate goals that, okay, we have to achieve this, so that people come from their those group of theirs and start working towards what that superordinate goal is. You would have seen in that Lagan movie, Kachra Khelega. Moment he said Kachra Khelega, everyone wanted to pursue that caste thing, but they were looking at a bigger goal. Same way, if you want to do recategorization, then what you should do is you should start making cross-functional teams. That helps in different people coming together and understanding each other. You put certain recruitment policies, norms and tests so that people are not using their judgment or bias. Amazon started something. Amazon had an AI engine. AI engine started learning and it started creating bias for people, that it will not hire women because that is how people were getting hired, and AI picked that up. So they discarded that AI, but this is how mind works. So you bring in diversity. Another thing which you do is, suppose if there is a regional thing which is going on, you try to create clubs which are apart from work. So people come based on their interest, start participating in that particular club, they come to know each other better. So those boundaries of that my state is better or your state is better, those kind of things, or my department is better, your department is not, that goes away. Another thing which you would have seen which creates bias, we create hierarchy of grades in the organizations. And you would have seen there is an effort from organization side to create a flat structure. That is another method of cutting out the discrimination which we do based on that a person who is at a lower grade, can that person give ideas? That is why you run different kind of suggestion schemes and things like that, so that anyone can give idea. You want to cut out on these caste systems which in our corporate lives we have created to manage ourselves better. So I believe these are some things which we can work on in public life. There is like you would have seen Choki Dhani. Go to Chokidhani, you understand, okay, this is what the culture of Rajasthan is. You start appreciating it. So corporates can also start doing similar kind of things inside, where different kind of people, different groups come and display what they are all about.
Absolutely. Sure. Thanks. Great. Those are, fantastic examples of what companies should do or can do, to lessen this issue in terms of discrimination in their organizations. Padmaja, coming back to you, Aquil briefly mentioned in terms of measurement and whether these measures are wrong because of the way the hierarchies are there, and Harjeet just mentioned that also. So, is there any good way to measure, whether you're doing good on removing these biases, or measurement of a good D&I kind of situation?
I mean, definitely you can measure. Measurement in itself may not be enough because the numbers may not tell everything, but it definitely makes sense to measure. So I think basic measurements like at the most basic level, probably things like representation, right? Representation at different levels of the pipeline. Measurement around, let's say, career progression. So we, for example, do a lot of governance around, say, progression. If there's any sort of performance rating, any sort of distribution, does it stack up for genders? I mean, not to enforce anything, but at least to get a sense that what's happening. Pay equity reviews, right? Just to see that for the same role, just as an organization across the board, pay equity, how does it stack up? There's certainly a lot of things that can be measured. Also, feedback, I think, helps just to get a sense from everybody in the organization that how inclusive a place do you think we are? Does everybody feel they can speak up? When you get employee feedback, get a look at what different segments are saying, genders, generational, what are people saying? So I think measurement certainly helps. It always gives a sense of direction and keeps us honest.
Sure. So in your experience working with clients for so many years, especially in recent years, have you seen large number of companies doing this measurement as part of their internal MIS, at least from an HR dashboard perspective?
I think the number has actually increased a lot, Advait. In fact, some years ago, I remember working with NASSCOM, on this whole, which are the companies that are really good around different dimensions of diversity and inclusion. It is very interesting that you have different approaches. You have some who put these KPIs and targets, right? They say that we must have so many, and they have good outcomes on different fronts. But those who don't do KPI targets, but just put in place initiatives, they have focus. For example, they would have strong mentoring programs. They would have a culture where, there was informal mentoring, where there was really meritocracy. See, actually, it's interesting, since this point of meritocracy came earlier, that if it is a true meritocracy and you only look at capabilities and contributions, right, then you actually encourage a more diverse workforce because there is less of, bias. The focus is on the good job and what got done, right? What I'm saying is that while working with NASSCOM, just to help with this whole, companies and what they do on diversity, every year there would be maybe close to 100 companies that would share information. And it was good to see how over the years, more and more are having a focus on this, whether it's in qualitative ways like programs to help, right? Sensitization programs, the kind of governance that I spoke about, pay equity reviews. I think definitely there has been improvement. I mean, obviously we still have a long way to go, but I think a lot of people, organizations are thinking about
I think we are short of time now, so maybe one last question to each one of you. Which is the actual unfortunate worst form of discrimination you've seen? And obviously you need not mention names, but one that has got embedded in your mind for the wrong reasons.
Harjeet, you want to go first? Amita?
Yeah,
I
Amita,
can go first. Yeah, all right, I can go first. So, Of course, in terms of my journey also, or otherwise as well, when I went through the journey of metamorphosis, of course, I went through the discrimination in my personal space or otherwise also, at various stages of life. And if I need to speak about LGBTI plus community, because unfortunately there was very limited slots in the session. So a lot of members from the LGBTI plus community have been shunned by their own families, or at the workplaces. When I was talking about legal rights and protection, they are not inclusive for these individuals, and that's how constantly they are being discriminated at every step of the way. In the family context, some of these individuals are subjected to inhumane conversion therapies, inhumane medical treatments, and eventually some of them end up ending their lives. I know trans women who are literally been subjected to begging and physical work because all the time they have been discriminated by either their families or otherwise. So that's what it is.
Sure. Thanks. Harjeet? You're on mute, perhaps?
I'm so sorry. I was saying I see life from a very different lens. So, look, I have been from a state board, a backbencher. So nobody had a lot of expectations from me that this guy will do anything in life, and people talk, and your parents get a lot of feedback. So since then, what I have learned is, if somebody is saying something about you, instead of making a perception in your mind that the other person thinks about you in this particular manner and you start affecting yourself, just come out of that domain. Start focusing on what you are, who you are, and move forward. That is the best thing you can do for yourself. Forgive all those people who are saying something about you or doing, you feel bad. It pierces here inside. But what's the point in hurting yourself?
But Harjeet, you think forgive all those people is easier said than done, right?
Pardon?
You're saying forgive all those people, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I am not saying it is easy. I never said it is easy. But thing is, look, either you stand up and fight. And if you can't, then forgive and move forward. Don't get stuck there. Look, that is what our IR people teach us since beginning, that moving forward in life is the best thing you can do to yourself and the people around you. So never get stuck with an argument or anything. If you can fight for it. If you can't fight for it, then forgive and move forward.
Sure. Lovely. Thanks. Padmaja, last words.
Sorry to interrupt, because I just have to say this. I'm so sorry. So Harjeet, there are certain instances where we have to speak out. Otherwise, things will never change. Status quo will continue. Marginalized communities will get discriminated. So to make individuals realize, because unconscious bias happens unconsciously. So if an individual is practicing unconscious bias, because of self-righteousness, that individual will never realize unless somebody speaks out and makes that individual realize that this is what unconscious bias is. It's not about standing up, it's about speaking out.
I completely agree with you. What I'm saying is, if somebody is doing something, give feedback. So when you give feedback,
so he can speak out, of course.
Look, with one feedback, the person doesn't improve. What you need to do is make that continuous feedback keep happening, but you should not get stuck there. That is the point I was making. I have no disagreement with the point you are making. What I'm saying is, it is important to move forward. Even when you are speaking up, you are standing for yourself, you should always stand up for what is not right. Otherwise, no point in becoming a HR professional or even a human being if you're not standing for the right thing. Stand for the right thing, but don't get stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. Padmaja.
I think the worst incident that I have seen was related to a friend of my daughter's who is gay. He used to get bullied mercilessly in school. And in many ways, I think that is when I realized that I have a lot of bias and I need to open up my mind. And it just made my blood boil to see how he did and had this time.
Yeah, interesting. I'm hoping this was years ago and not recently.
Sorry?
Because hopefully things have changed since then.
I don't know. I still think that sometimes there are pockets where it's there, and I think each of us has to really examine our own, thoughts, value system. Sometimes we think we are progressive, but deep down we have a lot of biases.
Yeah,
that's the worst I've seen.
I think we believe we are progressive as long as things are happening, far away. When soon it comes to something closer to you, that facade of progressiveness sometimes falls off. That happens.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, Harjeet.
Look, one different kind of bias happens in the organizations which actually impacts organizations a lot. That is called performance bias. You start identifying these are the two people who are performing and the entire workload goes to them. The rest of the team cuts off. Then what happens is you are not performing optimally. So that performance bias is also bad. You have to make sure that all members in the team are performing at a similar level. Plus minus delta is okay. So
boss gives work to the same person, he or she, because he or she knows that the other person is going to deliver as expected on time, equality, and therefore that performance bias happens. Yeah, I think so. Great. I think we are well past our time. So thank you so much, all of you, for your valuable time and sharing of your experiences and insights. I would now like to call Neeraj to make the closing remarks on behalf of NHRDN. Neeraj, you there?
Yeah. Hi, Advait. Thank you so much, all of you. I think brilliant session. Like I was, tweeting and talking about it there on the social media during this time, that it's been a session that makes one reflect on what one has been doing in the past, and I'm sure many of our audiences would have really felt that, and a very, very loud shout of thanks to all four of you and Dr. Aquil, who had to leave a little earlier. Brilliantly done, and on behalf of the entire committee at NHRDN, I would like to thank Advait and the entire Upohan team for having managed such a brilliant session. Also, although we've short out of time, a couple of things at NHRDN, we also have some responsibilities in terms of what we want to do for the society, and one of them is we are partnering with a few NGOs, and I think we'll just take a couple of more minutes of yours to walk you through something that we are quite passionate about and want to make sure that in some way all of you can contribute to that. Can I request Sheetal take it up from here?
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess either she's not able to hear or we'll play the clip. So thank you so much, all of you. It's been a brilliant session.
Hi, Neeraj sir. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you, Neeraj sir. I guess Sheetal is here. Sheetal, can you hear us? Sheetal, can you hear us?
I'm not sure whether she can. Darpan, would
I
you be
just
able
heard
to
her
help?
voice. Okay. I think we should move forward.
Maybe we close out now. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks, Padmaja. Thanks, Amita. Thanks, Harjeet. Neeraj, Darpan. Eklavya, thank you so much.
Nice meeting you, Padmaja.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Neeraj.
Most welcome, sir.
Thank
Most
you,
welcome.
Ravi.
See you all again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.